All right, let's do it.
We are ready and recording. Excellent. So let me start bringing people in. And perfect. We have a first guest. Excellent. And it looks like I've done it right, and we cannot see you, and hopefully you can see and hear us, Sam. You can try out the emojis if you wouldn't mind. I think that's the primary way you can interact with us. There you go. Excellent.
Nice.
Thank you so much. We get the floating thumbs up. I love it. And we're just getting started, so we'll give it a few minutes, although not too many. I think it's just a busy travel season. I don't know how your spring has been, Jim, but I'm between my 4th and 5th big trip this spring. Just catching my breath at home. So, I'm not expecting a record turnout today.
Yeah, no, same. Yeah, I was just at the Champions Retreat in Milwaukee 2 weeks ago, which was amazing.
The Champions
Retreat is the big gathering of the B Corps from North America.
Oh,
so there's like 600 or 700 B Corps that gather every 2 years. It's a really amazing event. So
that sounds really cool.
Yeah.
I went when I was still at EcoTrust. I went to the Pacific Northwest meetup, or maybe it was the Champions Retreat, but it felt like there were hundreds of people there. But now that you say it, maybe that was in fact a national event, and not a local one. I was just going to brag about how most of them are from the Pacific Northwest, but I don't think that would be right.
Oh, there's a huge concentration. I mean, 2 years ago, we had it in Vancouver. And of course, like all the British Columbia and Washington State and Oregon B Corps were there, which was really amazing.
Nice.
This year, I think because it was in the Midwest, it drew kind of other B Corps in who didn't make the trip to Vancouver. So that was really good as well.
That's awesome. Well, actually, I want to talk to you about B Corps and public benefit corporations in a bit, but let's get started and do more of an intro. You and I just realized that we could do this whole conversation in German because you lived in Germany for a long time. However, we will not do that in the interest of the audience, the hidden audience that is nonetheless present. So talk a little bit about where your sort of path as a lawyer specializing in better businesses.
Yeah, so it's been a bit of a circuitous route to get here. I've been practicing law for almost exactly 30 years now. I realized that my graduation from law school was, I think, like literally within a couple of days, 30 years ago today. And so it's been a long career. I started out in traditional law firms, spent a long time, a couple of decades working in big law firms and traditional law. And, in that environment, you kind of do whatever work you can get and whatever clients come along, as long as they're not axe murderers. You kind of, you do the work that you have. And there's not a big emphasis on impact or purpose. You don't feel much agency in terms of the types of clients you're working with. You're part of a huge machine that exists to generate profits and not much else. Did that for a couple of decades, and I went in-house. I was general counsel of a tech company, actually based in Frankfurt, for several years. And when I left that about 2.5 years ago, I kind of took a step back and thought, I have about a decade left in my career, and I really want to create something meaningful and lasting, and something that sort of has an impact beyond just me being able to pay my mortgage. And so I sat down with a long-term colleague and friend, Julie Ryan, who we started together as junior associates way back in the 90s and worked together in various places over the years. And we both had a very open conversation. And I said, I've been following the B Corp movement and the impact business movement for years now, but I've never really felt an opportunity to do much in that space, because that's not the kind of work that's really supported by traditional law firms. And also the billing rates have gotten so out of hand at traditional law firms that most small to mid-sized companies, whether they're mission driven or not, just can't afford to work with those firms. And so, I presented my idea to Julie, and I said, I'd love to build a firm that exists to work with impact companies and has an economic model that makes it accessible and affordable and very flexible, and is in contrast to traditional law firms, not an extractive model where you have a couple, equity partners sitting at the top of a huge pyramid, earning rents from everybody else's work and paying them, a very small percentage of what they generate. And Julie was thinking along the same lines, and she was thinking she wanted to set up a firm to work with women founders and women-owned businesses. That is her passion. She's done that for many years. And so we said, look, those two things are very compatible. Why don't we do that together? And so about 2.5 years ago, we formed Impact GC, and we did it with a couple basic kind of founding principles. One was, as I said, we wanted to sort of be very intentional about the economic model so that it was, one, accessible to small to mid-sized companies in the impact space, two, very equitable to everybody who might join us over the years. And we're now 6 partners. We started just with me and Julie. Now we have 6 partners and growing. And so we wanted it to be a non-extractive model, something that was very fair and created sort of an economic system that allowed people to earn a living and support their families without having to work excessive hours or feel the stress of constant generation of more fees. And we're going to really concentrate on serving clients and living their values both at work and at home. And then we also wanted the firm to be credible and aligned with our clients. And so it was clear that we had to be a B Corp as well. And so we are certified B Corp, one of the maybe 25 firms in the country that are. It's unfortunately still a very small community of B Corp lawyers and law firms. We're also a 1% for the Planet member, certified carbon neutral law firm. And so we try to go through the same journey that our clients go through. So we understand their challenges, but also so they can see we are truly aligned with them. We share their values, and that's the basis on which we work with people.
So, of course, if you've known me for half a minute, I can't resist this joke. So wait, you're carbon neutral, so you don't generate any hot air?
We don't breathe. We don't breathe. No, we hold our breath whenever it works.
I'm just amusing myself at this point. I have so many questions about your business model because I've come across this a number of times now. I'm actually really intrigued that you're relatively new at this for-purpose lawyering, and I have more questions for you about that too. But talk more about your business model. So it sounds like it's not regular billable hours. It sounds like it's not the standard partnership model, which creates some of this craziness that's inherent to the economic models of most law firms. And it sounds like you're trying to share some of that with your clients. And I'm curious what that looks like from a sort of product or service perspective.
Yeah, so there's a lot of dimensions to that question. Sort of internal facing in terms of how the firm works with our partners. The one metric that we found is the biggest lever for creating an equitable model and also an affordable and accessible model was the percentage of revenues that you share with the people who do the work, right? So in a traditional law firm, if you have an associate and a counsel, a non-equity partner, even a junior partner, if they bill an hour of work and that hour gets paid, they typically earn about 25 to 30% of the revenues that result from that hour of work. And so you ask, well, where'd the other 75% go? Well, it goes to expenses and overhead, including super expensive, partner retreats at luxury resorts. And then the rest of it goes to equity partners who earn, money for work that they're not doing. And now, at traditional law firms, at the big ones, the average equity partner earns $7 or $8 million a year, and the big ones earn 20, 25, $30 million a year. It's crazy, right? And all that money's coming from somewhere, and where it's coming from is clients paying excessive rates and attorneys working excessive hours and realizing only a small portion of the value they're generating. And so we discovered as we worked through different economic models that if you adjust that sharing percentage to a much higher and more equitable percentage, so that the lawyer who's doing the work and providing the value to the client is taking home the bulk of the value they're creating, then suddenly you can have much lower billing rates. You can have lawyers. So we have a soft cap on billable hours where we don't want anybody billing more than 30 hours a week, and ideally more in the 25-hour range. And so the reason behind that is twofold. We want people to be able to be present for their families, to have a healthy lifestyle, to be engaged in their communities or their church or whatever it is that's important to them outside of work. And we don't want work to get in the way of that. And the other is we want our lawyers to be fresh when they're talking to a client. We want that to be hour 4 of their day, not hour 12 of their day. And so when they're doing work, they're focused, they're fresh, and they're not sort of paying a personal price for, you know, the amount of work that they have to do. So that was the biggest lever that we found. And so in terms of then the external facing view, creating accessibility, we have sort of, you know, the starting point is billing rates that are about 25% of what my peers charge.
Here we have a technical glitch.
Oh, okay.
We just glitched here, so I lost about a minute or so of what you were saying on the external facing.
Okay. Sorry. Well, I'll start over with that. So, so the, you know, that lever of having a much more equitable sharing percentage for the lawyers who do the work, that allows us to do a couple of things. One is it allows us to have much lower billing rates. And so my billing rate is about 25% of what my peers that I went to law school with are charging at traditional law firms. And so that's part of it, is just making, you know, the basic cost of working with us is much, much lower than it is with a traditional law firm. And then we have, you know, a lot of flexibility in terms of how we work with clients. We do some fixed fee work when we're doing sort of a standardized project like a entity formation or a conversion to a public benefit corporation. You know, we'll do that on a fixed fee basis, so the client knows, okay, it's just going to cost this much and nothing more. We do Low-Bono work for some clients, especially startups that are trying to build an impact business and need some support. And of course, we do a lot of Pro-Bono work as well. We have a commitment as part of our B Corp certification to donate at least 5% of our gross revenues every year to nonprofits. And that includes both cash donations and pro bono work for nonprofits. And so we do a large amount of pro bono work, and try to use that as a way to make sure that we're accessible to people who couldn't otherwise hire a lawyer, but they do need our help.
Yeah, I love that. And part of what comes to mind, and like I say, I've seen this with other law firms that are sort of active in this space. It's a real struggle working through a better business model, right? Because to your point, right, like it really requires the senior partners, the equity partners, to basically be less greedy, right? Like
Yes,
that's where you're achieving all those gains, right? You're able to redistribute because you don't want to make 8 million or 20 million a year. And also, I can't but think, again, with your background, like having done the big firm, the in-house, and so you have all that under your belt. I'm telling myself a story here about, actually goes back to orthodontia. When my stepson required orthodontia, we had this fierce debate with his mother about what practice we should use. And she wanted to go with the younger doctor who had a shiny practice and whose fees were about 50% higher. And we wanted to go with the guy we knew who was a bit older. His practice was, you know, a generation behind in all the equipment. But you know what? He had paid off his medical school loans. So it didn't feel like every time you sent in your orthodontia payment, like you're paying off his loans. And part of me is like, I'm thinking like, oh, there's a similar dynamic at play here, right? Like you're well past your law school loans, I'm guessing.
Yeah, that was my first priority, and when I graduated law school, was paying off those loans. And it's funny because it gave me a sense of freedom, but then I also, you know, ended up staying in big law, even though I didn't feel aligned, I didn't feel comfortable in that world. But it's very seductive, right? I mean, there's always the next sort of you know, incentive right in front of you, right? So the promotion to senior associate, the promotion to counsel, the promotion to partner, you know, the idea that you can build a team around yourself, that you have more autonomy. And the reality is a lot of that is fiction, that you don't actually get more autonomy, you don't get more freedom, and the job doesn't get less demanding, it gets kind of more demanding in a lot of ways. And so, you know, it is sort of a treadmill that you're running on, that you feel like you're moving forward, but it's really kind of illusion that, you know, you are kind of increasing your salary as you go, but, you know, that can't be everything. And so at some point you kind of reach the point, and some people reach it earlier. And I think it's everybody's own personal journey to say, either this is an environment they actually like, and some people do like that world. I never really did. I felt like those weren't really my people, and the clients that I worked with, which were big investment banks and PE firms, weren't also really my people. They were nice individuals, but culturally it wasn't really where I wanted to be in the world. But I don't think I had the courage when I had young kids and, a wife who unfortunately was sick for many years, to take the leap and say, I'm going to do something brand new, and start at zero. Because when you start a business, as I'm sure, everybody in this space knows, you take a hit, right? You don't earn a dime for a year plus, and you have to be willing to withstand that. And so that financial freedom of, my kids are now through college, and I feel more kind of at peace with the fact that, I know I can pay my mortgage, but I also know that I don't need to be wealthy in this life to be happy. And it's more important to me to be generating kind of, social profits than it is economic profits. And, those chasing after that kind of elusive nirvana of being, the top dog on a big, sitting on top of a huge pyramid, that's just not, it doesn't have any positive value for me.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you were able to extract yourself and are finding a great deal of satisfaction in the work you're doing now. I'm curious, what are some sort of typical clients for you? Like, what does now it's not the PE firms, like, what is there a size of client you'd like to work with, or who has found you first since you hung out your new shingle?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I would say 90% of my clients are clients, first of all, they're from the B Corp world or the impact world. And 90% of them are clients that I've met by attending events in person, whether it's B Corp events or it's other things like SOCAP, which is an impact investing conference, or other things like the Mo Summit that Big Path Capital puts on. So, and what I found is the way that I develop business now is by meeting people on a personal and a values basis first. And I don't pitch to clients really at all, right? I never walk up to somebody and think, wow, this would be a great client to have. I walk up to them and I have a really lovely conversation about what they do and why they do it and why it's meaningful to them. And then they want to know about what I do and why it's meaningful to me. And that conversation turns into client relationships in some organic way. And so it's a much more pleasant and personal way of doing business and developing business than it ever was before. Because I'm never really kind of in business development mode. I want to get to know these individuals mode, and I want to hear their stories and I want to learn from them, and learn how they're being impactful and what we could do that could be more impactful. And out of that comes some sort of alchemy that generates client relationships.
Is it typically sort of going concerns that are looking to change their legal team, or is it more early stage founders, be they in for-profits or non-profits, who are looking for their first ever lawyer?
So it's a combination. I would say, so we do have clients that are pure startups through, clients that have several $100 million in revenue. The thing that unifies most of the clients, but not all of them, is they don't have in-house legal teams yet. A couple of our clients do, and we work together with them. But generally, our function is to be outside general counsel for our clients. And so what that means is the client, needs legal support. Sometimes they come to us with a very specific question or specific project they need help with, and we help them with that. And then they don't need any more legal help for the next 6 months, and that's fantastic. Typically what happens is they have an issue and they need some help with it, and then they realize that we can support them in a more sort of ongoing way. And so then we kind of naturally morph into their general counsel, and end up kind of handling broadly kind of all of their legal issues. And we have our limitations as lawyers, like everybody does. We don't do everything. We don't do tax. We don't do litigation. We don't do patents. But what we do is we have a network of allied and aligned lawyers that are in those specialties that we work with. And so when we have a client who has a need in areas that we can't cover, we recommend, why don't we work with our co-counsel? We'll manage that relationship. We'll make sure they're not overbilling you. We'll make sure that they're doing exactly what you need and not more. And so we tend to evolve into that role of sort of taking on the general counsel role.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I have a firm like that for one of my companies, and it's just really great to have sort of the go-to. And they have, I don't know what their pricing model is, but they're also, come to think of it, they're also sort of survivors of the corporate law grind, and have sort of reinvented how they want to do business, right? And have families, etc., and make that possible for their associates and so on. And they have a similar model, right? Where they basically have a network, and then when we needed a securities lawyer, our counsel basically managed that relationship for us. And I also like some of the things that you mentioned, like the fixed price models, right? So I've had good success with law firms. I mean, there's some things that are so standard, they're so rote, right? Like nonprofit formation, for example. It's pretty simple to get it's pretty straightforward to get a decent, like, I don't know, $2,500 package or whatever, right?
Right, exactly.
That people are doing. So I think that's helpful. I want to, before we get into some of the audience-generated questions, both that folks submitted beforehand, which I stuck in the Q&A, and that people have been generating now, I want to talk a little bit more about so pitfalls you see in businesses. But I want to make anybody watching aware, if you go to the top, there's like a little purple question mark in a bubble. If you click on that, it'll pull up the Q&A box. Or if you go to the bottom left and look at the nine stacked dots for the meeting tools, click on that. You can also find the question and answer interface. So feel free to pop in there with any questions. So pitfalls. What are some of the I titled this meeting, what's law got to do with it? So you want to build a business that's for good. What are some of the pitfalls that you see, like things that people should avoid, or have to learn the hard way if they don't pay attention to it from the get-go?
Yeah, so one thing that I see, and this sounds self-serving, but I hope it's not, and that is sometimes people wait too long to talk to a lawyer. And so I have clients that I've worked with in the last year or two, that I had one client, a certified B Corp creative agency out here in the Northeast, and they hadn't had a lawyer look at their client agreements in something like 9 years. And so they didn't have, anything about any of the developments in privacy law. They didn't have anything about AI. They didn't have anything about sort of, how they handle confidentiality and things like that. And their forms had evolved over the years by incorporating comments that they'd gotten from the other side of their client relationships, but had not been balanced by somebody on their side saying, you should do that, you can accept that, but you should also adjust this, to make it work as an internal system, which any contract should be. And so, I do see a lot of hesitation among small businesses to talk to lawyers because they're afraid, one, it's going to cost too much, two, they're not going to get value for money, and three, the lawyer isn't going to understand what their business is anyways. And so they're going to get some advice that they don't know what to do with, or it's not going to help them move forward. And so, and that's all very understandable. And I think that, those are barriers that we try to overcome with people by spending a lot of time. I will spend hours and hours on the phone with somebody before they hire us, just trying to help them understand what could a lawyer do for you. Do you need a lawyer now? Sometimes I tell clients or potential clients, you don't need a lawyer yet. If you get to this point, then you should call me and then we can talk about how we could help you. But don't hire a lawyer until you need it, but find out whether you need them before you're in a hole and you've done something that may come back to haunt you. And we see that also with, clients that are going through major transactions, whether it's an acquisition or they're being acquired or something like that, or they're entering into some kind of partnership, and they'll go through months of discussions with their counterparty on a term sheet or a letter of intent, and not realizing that is actually a critical part and critical phase of the negotiation where they would benefit from some legal support. And then, they'll send me a signed term sheet and I'll say, I'm not sure I would have counseled you to agree to that if we had spoken a month ago. Do you think we can go back and have some discussions about that? Because that's something that could, that shifts a lot of risk to you that you probably shouldn't bear in this kind of relationship. And so sometimes you do see that kind of pitfall of clients just not wanting to talk to a lawyer because of those very legitimate concerns. And then sometimes getting to a point where it's not serving them anymore. The other thing is, and this is really hard to deal with because the impact law community is very small at this point. There's something like 300 total lawyers in all of America who work at B Corp law firms. It's an insanely small number of people out of millions of lawyers and millions of businesses. And, so it can be hard to find a lawyer who is values aligned with you. But I think it's really worth the search, and it's worth kind of delving into, finding a suite of professional advisors who do understand your business, and they understand why you do business the way you do it, right? They understand why you have the mission that you have, why you might be a B Corp, or why you're a public benefit corporation, why you're a nonprofit, or why you have a nonprofit and a for-profit, and how those two things interact. And so I think it's really important to find that person who's going to invest time in understanding what you're all about and what you're trying to accomplish.
Is there an association of values aligned lawyers? Is there an easy way to sort of the one-stop shopping that people could do to find a lawyer?
There is. So there's an organization we belong to called the Global Alliance of Impact Lawyers. You can also go on the B-Lab website. So B-Lab is the agency, the nonprofit that administers the B Corp certification. They have a search tool on their website. So you can search by industry. So you can search in legal. If you wanted to find B Corp law firms, as far as I know, all the B Corp law firms are listed on there. You can do it by geography. And so you can find, you do have to do a little searching, but you can find the firms that might be aligned with you. And there's other professional services as well. It's really, to me, about the whole ecosystem of professional support, whether it's accounting or tax or sort of financial services or insurance brokers or whatever it is, with a little searching, you can find those people who are aligned with you.
Yeah, it's definitely been, I spend a considerable amount of time trying to find aligned service providers, so I feel that directly in some of the organizations and companies that I have some responsibility for. And sometimes it's, I've run across the phenomenon where somebody sort of talks a good game, but then you realize that your specific need or your transaction or your structure, I've helped set up a number of hybrid entities. You end up paying them to learn and get studied up, and I hate that with a passion. Like, no, I feel like if I bring you an interesting, juicy hybrid structure, then if anything, you should be paying me. To learn about it, not the other way around. And so that's been a cause of some tension in my relationship with law firms. It's like, this is so bleeding edge what some of us are building. There isn't a ton of examples out there, right? And so I really appreciate the sort of partnership approach that you're outlining, and the idea that, like a business person, an entrepreneur, like we know why we're building what we're building, right? And to approach that in a sort of a mutual learning is much more interesting. I want to get a couple of these questions in. Let's see. Now I have to find them again. So confidently talked everybody through the the interface only to then fumble it myself. So here's a question about, how do you, if you have a limited budget? So we talked a little bit about this, where do you, where do you go sort of for bottom of the pyramid kind of advice? Are there free legal clinics? Are there that small nonprofits can go to? Are there, part of what you're describing is when people have to search for it. What I don't see, and I didn't look at your website again before our chat today, but I'm curious, like a lot of law firms have these somewhat intimidating websites. Right? There's an anonymous contact form. Tell us what you want to talk about. What I would love to see more of is more of almost like like a checklist. Like you were beginning to talk about, like here is, like in a conversation, you can outline, you know, here's what I'm hearing from you, here's what I might be able to help you with. And I always wonder, you know, this happens in so many other domains. Like here's your checklist. Like I do one to get people to think about if they know their business model fundamentals, right? And I have a 10 question checklist that they can self-administer. And then if they're above a certain point score, they don't really need this online course that I've developed, right? But if they're below it, then go over here. Here's a specific resource that you can access. And I'm just wondering how you think about that. And then also to the meat of the question, is there a free legal clinic? Are there some free tools that people can access that are a good starting point?
Yeah, so it really depends kind of what you're trying to do and where you are. For nonprofits, if you're talking about sort of small nonprofits that need support, I think there are legal clinics out there. There are at some of the law schools. There are legal clinics that will support nonprofits. You know, in theory, every lawyer as a member of the bar has an obligation to do pro bono work. That is actually part of our ethical obligations as lawyers. That's not to say that obligation is really prioritized at a lot of firms and in a lot of practices, but you know, that is something that we are supposed to do as members of the bar. We take that obligation really seriously. So, you know, I think every law firm does have a pro bono program. And in most law firms, you can search on their website and see who is their pro bono coordinator and email them. And, you know, some law firms may have an intake form, others may just have an email contact. You know, for our firm, we're quite small, obviously, so we try to be very unbureaucratic. So, you know, we just invite people to email me or Julie or one of our other partners, and, you know, ask if they're nonprofit or if their idea is something we can help with. And then we have a conversation. As I said, you know, I spend a lot of time speaking with people long before we ever get hired, just to understand what is it you're trying to accomplish? What are the legal dimensions of that? You know, are those things that we can help with? What would that look like? Are those services that we can provide for free? Are they services we can provide on a discounted basis? You know, or should this be a paying client relationship? And then how do we make sure you have the right team to support you? So there should be resources out there. I know it's hard to find, but you know, certainly if you do manage to find those firms that put themselves forward as having impact practices, and you know, and then find on their website the pro bono coordinator at those firms and say, hey, I'm trying to do something impactful here. Is this something you could help with? That should result in some, you know, at least a dialogue that could, you know, potentially get you, you know, pro bono counsel. You know, it depends what your kind of specific needs are. With smaller firms, you know, we don't cover every single area of the law. As I said, a bigger firm might claim to at least. But if you get into a dialogue with somebody who does care about that impact and that pro bono mission, even if they can't help you, they should be able to help you find somebody who can.
Might be a good project for the Global Alliance to create a bit of a heuristic, right? Because I think that it's a really good quality question, right? To say, where do I go first, and how do I think about it? And that could be a good little sort of lead generator for the members of the Alliance, but also just really helpful for people to think through. I mean, I'm a big fan of sort of public and free frameworks, you know, like the social business model canvas or what have you. And there's some great other tools out there, you know, for entrepreneurs who are looking for capital, figuring out, you know, is their business ready for capital, and then what flavor of capital. And I just don't think I've ever seen anything like that for legal. You know?
Yeah, so I think you're right. You know, I think that the law firm world is highly competitive. And so there's not, unfortunately, in traditional law firms, much interest in collaborating to do something like that. We do have kind of a program that we do with some clients that haven't had a lot of legal support, but more established clients, that we do sort of a a diagnostic. And so it's a fixed fee process where we send them, a questionnaire as something like you mentioned, and they can kind of tell us, what they've done, what they have, what they're, how they, what risks they identify, who their business partners are, and sort of all the dimensions of what their critical documents are and how their business works. And then we can go through, on a very low cost basis and say, okay, these are the things that we think are, we can rate them. Is it a red X? Is it sort of a, a green check mark, or is it somewhere in between? And then say, this is what we would recommend, and this is how we would kind of do that sequentially, so that you're not paying for things you don't need today, but you are addressing the things that are probably more time sensitive or critical.
I like that. I wonder if it would make sense to consider doing a free version of that, just an abbreviated sort of self-diagnostic. And then if you score 4 out of 5, call us, because you're exposed to all this regulatory risk.
That's a good idea.
Example, right?
Yeah.
I'm just still chuckling to myself. I once signed a contract with the Gates Foundation. And in the contract, as a consulting contract, to your point about these agreements that are not regularly updated, they actually had a clause in there. It still makes me laugh. that you were basically agreeing to maintain a Windows machine and Windows Explorer 6.0 or higher. And I'm like, really? So in the PDF, I actually inserted a little thing with my phone number and said, if you see this, please call my number. Right? Or if you can tell what my MAC address is that I filled the form in. It was just ridiculous. It was absolutely ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
Of course, in this case, that wouldn't cause any big complications, but sometimes they're just bizarre leftover clauses. So that idea of doing a spring clean of all your business documents or an audit makes a ton of sense to me. So so that might be food for thought, to see what's a free diagnostic. And yes, it is a competitive landscape, but if you put something out for free, maybe other B Corp lawyers would also feel compelled to do something for free. And that helps everyone. I'm always instigating trouble. That's my hobby. I've got another good question here about this. I think somebody who's working as a business advisor with companies. And so now there's, of course, made worse by AI, there's so many ways now to get legal information online. It's almost the flip side of the earlier question, right? Like, where do I go? And everywhere are sort of the two extremes, right? Now everything is at everybody's fingertips. And if business owners are not able to hire an attorney, so now they're starting to draw up things like contracts and handbooks with the help of AI. What are some trusted sources or tools that this person can refer somebody to?
So unfortunately, I don't think there are any really. So maybe take a step back. It's not. You shouldn't mistake Claude or Chat GPT or something like that for legal advice, because they don't dispense legal advice. They're not qualified to. You may not need legal advice. You may just need a template for something fairly simple, and that's fine. There are no, to my knowledge, publicly available sources that will give you something that is akin to true legal advice off the web. And so, having said that, those tools are quite good and getting better. So we use generative AI in our practice in a very controlled manner, and that is, for example, if I need a template for a letter that I'm going to draft on behalf of a client, I don't sit down on a blank screen and draft the letter anymore. I type in prompts and I get a draft, and then I work through that what it spits out and redraft it and make sure that it is the letter that I think it should be, and that represents the client's interests and has the benefit of my legal experience. Same thing if I need, say, a standard boilerplate clause for a contract I'm working on. I just want to see a couple examples of what that clause looks like, because I have my templates. I could go back and search that, but it's just quicker for me to do an AI search. So we do use it in that sense. And the reality is, at this point, if you typed in, to one of the big models, please draft a PTO policy for a company with 10 employees located in Colorado. It's going to give you something that's 80% right.
Yeah.
Right. It's 80% right. 80% might be good enough for you right now, but you have to be aware that you have uncertainty about that last 20%.
Right.
Because the model doesn't understand what the law actually is, right? The model isn't admitted to the bar in Colorado, and the model can't, review any regulatory changes or anything that may affect what that policy should say. But it is going to be 80% right, and so you kind of have to make that judgment as a business owner. And people do this all the time, right? In every area. It's not just legal things, it's financial things, right? I mean, you may be working with an accountant where you're like, we could have more souped up financials, but I think these are good enough for now. That's a business judgment, right? And so we make these business judgments all the time. And I don't think law is necessarily different, but the problem is that 20% is a bit of a black box for anybody who's not a lawyer. And so it's a bit of a hard judgment call to make, but it is the reality that AI will spit out something that is quite good at this point.
I'm actually curious about a dimension of this question, right? So this sounds like this came from somebody who sounds like they're advising businesses, presumably getting paid. I wonder if there's an opportunity to just partner with a law firm and say, I've got this many clients, they're going to need review with a mixed bag of sort of legal issues. Can we create a partnership where you do the review of whatever comes through that's initially AI generated for a fee, right? But don't treat it as a brand new client every time that you have to onboard through your systems.
So we are required by bar rules to have an engagement letter with every client we work for.
Oh, those darn bar rules!
And that's to lock in that's to lock in the ethical obligation to the client and the confidentiality requirements.
That's why you can't operate like another consultant. Well, there's the answer then, right?
Exactly.
So you have to. And you can't be. It can't be a pass-through relationship, right? So this business advisor can't be your client and have the engagement letter and then pass through some of these questions.
So,
like if you were an advisor, if you were counsel to their business as opposed to the final client.
So a couple things: you would not have attorney-client privilege between the ultimate client and the lawyer,
right?
And that the ultimate client wouldn't have the benefit of the ethical obligations of the lawyer, right? And so I think that would be kind of a suboptimal model. And really, we're supposed to identify any client we're working for.
Yeah.
And so we have to do, we have to do a conflicts check. We have to do, KYC because, we have to know who our ultimate clients are.
Yeah.
So we do have situations where we're mandated by a parent company and we advise the subsidiaries as well. But that's a bit different than what you're talking about.
Yeah.
They're all part of one corporate group.
Yeah, it's an interesting conundrum, right? Where some of these like old, and established business models that are what they are for good reason are hitting this new reality, right? So maybe in that position, like having a referral relationship might be appropriate, but that's it's just a sticky wicket, right? But I think your point about, yes, the advice is run it through a lawyer, and if you don't, live with the risk that you're taking, the informed risk that you're taking as a business person. I will say there are some interesting sources of legal templates in the investment space that come out of the Innovative Finance Initiative, and they have a playbook for deals. So this may be of interest to you, Tim. That are vetted, that were vetted by literally globally 400 lawyers or something insane. And there's a book, Adventure Finance, that Orny Patton Powers wrote, and then there's a playbook that basically describes various investment deals that are impact forward deals, right? So for example, on redeemable equity or other forms of revenue-based finance or mezzanine debt, or you name it. And there is in fact a library of term sheets. And a library of some of these materials. And in one of my companies, we use that template for redeemable equity, and then negotiated some of the basic terms with our investor, and then just gave it to our counsel. And he was like, well, this is great. So there is so every once in a while there are pockets of these resources that are in fact vetted legally.
Yeah, and I think there should be more of those. And one space that we're doing a lot of work these days in is employee ownership. And it's something, there's sort of an intersection between mission-driven M&A, which is a topic that's very close to my heart as an M&A lawyer, and kind of coming up with creative models for impact companies to grow through acquisition or through joint ventures or through other kind of shared services platforms and other creative models. And then also incorporating an employee ownership element into those models. And, there is, interestingly, I don't remember if it's the Sustainable Economies Law Center or somebody else who maintains a very similar repository of documents from worker co-op transitions.
That's right.
I would like to see the same thing for employee ownership trusts, for example, and perpetual purpose trusts. And so, we're just on the cusp of the growth of these other models that involve these purpose trusts. And it's a very exciting time, and it's something that I think holds a lot of promise for impact businesses to lock in their mission and protect their companies and protect their employees through ownership transitions and through other changes. But in order to really spread that movement broader, I think we need to have a library, right, of standard documents and templates that people can look at and business people can look at and say, oh, I understand this. I have 3 questions, though. Let me go pay a lawyer to answer those 3 questions instead of paying a lawyer, to answer 100 questions or even to pose their own questions, right? And so I think it'd be really helpful to demystify some of these structures.
Oh, man.
By having those documents available. Yeah.
So much. Well, maybe that's a project you should undertake too. We could probably actually find some funding for it. The Innovative Finance Initiative has funding from a multifamily office. And if you're not a member of the IFI, I know there's a lot of interest of in employee ownership. And I think you might find critical mass of people who would collaborate on something of that nature.
Yeah, and there is a new organization called the Purpose Trust Ownership Network, PTON. Which had its first conference in Austin earlier this year, and the next event is in I believe Chicago in a few months. And that's an organization that's really trying to push these models of purpose trusts, whether it's to benefit the environment like Patagonia, or a particular cohort of farmers, for example, with Organically Grown Company in Portland, or employees or some other group of people, or kind of purpose. And I think that's really great that there's kind of some momentum around creating some best practices and creating a network for people to collaborate.
And that actually, I'd like to see more of that too. It seems like there's a cottage industry of consultants that has sprung up, but we haven't actually got this field building organization yet. And I have high hopes for Piton in that regard. It's sort of the place where a library of this nature could live, for example.
Exactly.
I want to get to Sam's question here on, and I think we've kind of covered off on it. Like, how can small organizations best prepare to meet legal experts so the valuable time you're generously offering is used efficiently? Are there good client-facing resources you can recommend?
That's interesting. So, I don't expect my clients to have fully baked questions, or new potential clients when they come to me. I really expect them to not know what questions to ask when they initiate a conversation. Or a lot of times what happens is they put a lot of time into trying to formulate questions, and then when I kind of follow up and ask further questions, it turns out those aren't really the questions that they need answers to. They're the questions that they were kind of formulating because they saw something online, or because they had conversations and it seemed like the most important thing. But from a lawyer's lens, there were other things that might be more critical. So I wouldn't feel stress of needing to prepare for that first, second, third, fourth conversation with a lawyer. If you're talking to somebody who is aligned with you and is there to be a resource for you, they should be happy to help you kind of work through that process of figuring out what questions should you actually be asking and how can those be answered. So I wouldn't stress too much about that.
Yeah, I may have a suggestion. You can tell me what you think of it. For Sam. So I'm gonna back into it through my example with accounting this year and tax prep. So I'm responsible for 4 or so companies, and they're nested, right? So there's a C corp and a partnership that roll into my S corp that rolls into my personal taxes, right? And I have been late on these taxes every year. So I've had this complex structure that I've created for myself. That makes sense in my head. This year, I thought, all right, I'm going to see if AI can actually be helpful here. So I set up a project in Claude. And the project level instruction is, you're my tax advisor. You're not my tax accountant, but you're my tax advisor who gets these structures. You understand the latest IRS regulations. You understand the deadlines, etc. And so at the project level, I basically then had this it's not a true agent, right? This assistant. And then in each chat, right, the model then just goes back into the constrained persona that you have created at the level of a project if you're using Claude. And then we had a chat about the timeline and what I need to do first. And then it came back with really useful questions and said, oh, do you have the consent from your partners? Do you have the latest information from your C Corp shareholders? Would you like, and then it became proactive and said, oh, would you like me to draft an email to your shareholders? And it was extremely helpful. And it was sort of and when I then showed up at my accountant's, she was like, oh, you're kind of sorted. And had just a few very small, like specific tweaks that she needed to make. And all my returns went in on time for the first time in like 10 years. And so I wonder if there's something like that especially if somebody like you, so what I did in my advisory practice, I'm working with a team that's spinning a commercial venture out of a nonprofit, and it's complex because it's in Canada and here, and so I'm pretty confident I can get them to the point where then they're ready to talk to their lawyers about papering it. But there's a step in my process where I wanted them to really align on their purpose, and timing wise, it didn't work out to bring the team all into one room. And so I worked with a different chat persona that I've created in Claude to help me draft a prompt that they could just cut and paste into a chatbot of their choice that is informed by the framework that I'm using to help them sort of elucidate their purpose. And they all came back raving, saying this was the easiest way to interact with this. And so I'm just wondering, like, because you and I are experts in our domains, right? Like, that's actually the right level at which to then program the AI. But you could conceivably hand that off to someone who is a non-expert, right? And give them a sort of an AI-powered tool to maybe overcome a little bit of that hesitancy that Sam is describing. Oh, I don't want to ask stupid questions of my lawyer.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, obviously, you get out of AI what you put into it, right? So a big part of it is whether you're drafting the prompts that are going to generate the responses that are actually helpful to you. And there is some nuance to that. And I actually think this is where the legal profession is headed. I think that 5 years from now, you're going to see a lot of law firms that don't have junior associates nearly in the numbers they do today. What they'll have is something akin to a paralegal who's been trained on prompt engineering, specifically for legal questions. And so I think you'll have people whose whole job is interacting with AI to generate drafts of documents or to do reviews of documents and generate summaries of key issues and things like that based on a specific education around how to correctly prompt the AI agent that you're working with or the AI tool that you're working with. And so there's definitely a lot of value to be extracted from that. And I think I would differentiate between, if you currently have lawyers that you're paying and every time you get on the phone with them, it costs you money, by all means, use all those tools that are available to make that conversation more efficient. And AI can certainly do that. If you run through a scenario and say, what questions should I be asking? You could even just ask the AI that, like,
yes,
here's the situation. Here's an email that I got from a counterparty. I'm not sure what questions I should ask. What questions should I ask a lawyer, right? It probably will give you a pretty good set of questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's if every minute that you're talking to a lawyer is costing you money, because you shouldn't have a minute. You shouldn't be paying for a lawyer for a minute that you don't need. It's a little different to me when I'm talking to somebody who hasn't been working with a lawyer,
Mm-hmm.
and because their ability to ask those questions of the AI and to pre-screen is probably a little bit less developed, because they haven't had the benefit of sort of previous interactions with the lawyer that's gotten them to the point they are. So
Yeah.
I think, and that's where I always say, you don't need to hire me until you need to hire me, right? Initial conversations, it can be 3 or 4, it can be 5. If we're just figuring out what your legal needs are, you'd never have to pay me for that, right? Because
fair enough.
Right?
No, and I like your approach to customer service 100%. And I don't know how old Sam is. I know my daughter, who's about to be 18, is petrified of picking up the phone and talking to another person. So, I mean, part of me is like, oh, yeah, there's like a whole generation of digital natives, right? Where maybe you can break down, like maybe if you developed an AI prompt that somebody can just cut and paste, right, to do some of this initial discovery, right? Like here is sort of the Jim Black bot, I think that's sort of where my mind was going. Not that somebody who's a non-lawyer can ask sensible questions of these generative models, because it's not likely to create good results. I will say that my I think I may have used I forget which one of my Claude personas I used, but it helped me navigate a sticky situation with the International Trade Administration of the United States on a company that has sunset, but we're using the same name and a successor company. We had some like outstanding obligations under the US, Europe, and Switzerland data equivalency, data privacy rules, and it's Byzantine bureaucratic language. And I got this nasty email from some administrator and ran it through the AI and asked it to draft a letter, and it was great. It had it resolved in 3 emails.
Wow.
It's like awesome.
That's amazing. Yeah.
And it was just giving me heart palpitations dealing with it. And so anyway, it can, when you know what you're doing, it can be very, but I think again, it's potentially an area where I don't see a lot of lawyers get proactive or innovative yet to say, if you don't want to talk to me or don't want to send me an email, here's this AI script that you can cut and paste and just send me the results, right?
Yeah, I think the challenge is that the ethical rules of the legal profession haven't caught up with what AI can do yet.
100%.
And so people are very hesitant to do anything that could be construed as giving legal advice without actually being mandated, or without, so if a law firm puts something out there, an AI enabled tool, and somebody used it and had a bad result, would that be a violation of that lawyer's ethical obligations because they hadn't been properly onboarded and yet they were deemed rendering legal advice? It's all, hopefully the rules will catch up, and we'll have clear guidance on what we can and can't do as a profession. I mean, that's for us to decide as a profession. But I think that's probably behind a lot of the hesitance to put tools out there right now.
Yeah, fair enough. So the upshot is, and I know we're coming up on time and you have to jump to a client call. The upshot is, don't hesitate to contact Jim. Please reach out by email, and I will circulate your email with the summary of our chat, which was fantastic. And just I may actually have some business for you on the M&A side, so I've just made note of that. That is your particular sweet spot. So really, I was just here interviewing my future lawyer.
Awesome. Perfect.
And this was great, Jim. Thank you so much for coming online, and can't wait to meet in person when you make your physical move to the Pacific Northwest.
Yes, thank you so much, Astrid. I really appreciate the conversation, and to everybody who joined.
Wonderful. Well, I'll let you go while I close up here, and we'll see you soon in Portland or Seattle. All right, take care.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Hello. And having said that, I now need to just close this. Perfect.